This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality.
Luck has bad breath. That's what the Schwartzbear said before they carried him out feet first. Billy was still on his feet the day he got out. He'd done hard time and more solitary than most, and had no luck. Why think of it now? But he did. He thought about luck and the panther he'd been dreaming about. He stood squinting outside Dannemora. "You better shit," he told the panther, patrolling his mind. "Billy's out. You'd better shit." He heard poor Schwartzbear say, "Too late. Get it?" Now he got it. The panther is blind. He no more knew why he stood there menacing a blind figment than he knew about luck. It just felt okay on a day better than most. Then he slipped between pale June blocks of Franklin County light and was gone. Big deal. No sweat. He was out of something more impregnable than Dannemora, the bestiary of his childhood, and now he walked clean out of that rabid zoo towards the southern lights, a twisted communicant of roaches. Maybe it was his dolphin's humor that did it. Ask the merchant seamen who play their boom boxes for them to tell you how dolphins look and smile at you, hold your eye, and show you their tricks. Sure, Billy thought of animals. He'd been one. Tanked with insects, cetaceans, raptors, reptiles, bottom feeders, and alien species. And one of them, the estimable black man Franklin Jones, had parked a conundrum in his head. "Look at 'em," he said. "Animal crackers, know what I'm saying? You're going to tell me, aren't you? People be like animals, Billy, only they animal crackers. Crazy? Yeah, but they crazy like different animals." He had on his mind something more vivid this day. A dream, a recurring dream. He kept changing. He was a panther. Then he was watching the panther. He could smell this panther, share its hunger, its rage and frustration. And one other thing, he couldn't remember when he awoke that he saw anything when he was a panther. "I'm telling you, Franklin, this panther is blind." "What difference it make, Billy boy? When this panther smell you, he be eating you. You not gonna care, he be blind. Panther, all he knows is you be food." Billy read the library at the prison out of panthers. He charmed the librarian into luring Panthera pardus from the county library. The panther became his meditation. As the yogi banks his eyes up in his head in his quest for samadhi, Billy contemplated this dream. And finally, he saw the panther pacing, twitching its tail, behind the barred eyes of his mother Frankie, and the barred eyes of all his other keepers, and at that moment he could no longer be counted among the nations of predators licking their chops in their childhood zoos. He'd figured out there's no difference to them between food and keeper, between food and you. The most perfect animal shits. Despite our beautiful faces and elegant minds, we shit and die. Billy once had a dolphin spirit, the spirit of amusement, before it was beaten and cowed, but by the time he was 11, he had the sardonic eye of an elephant, dour and fixed. In Dannemora, where Billy's file called him a violent psychotic, the psychiatrist had given him a metaphor for his predicament. Think of your childhood. In fact, think of everything up to now as a burning, smoke-filled movie house. What do? Figure out where the exits are, right? Dannemora certainly convinced him only the observant survive. One thing more the shrink had told him. Imagine yourself as if you were 9 or 10. You have to get that kid out of the burning building. That's your job. Understand? "What's playing?" Billy asked. What can I say to these guys that will make a difference, Herschel Schwartz thought. He was, by the time he met Billy, sick of the question and the questioner. Maybe he'd have stuck around if he'd known the next thing he would say would make a difference. But by the time it did, Herschel Schwartz had blown the roof of his head off. "It's your question." "Dumbo," Billy said. "It's your life, asshole, not mine. Think, see if you can think for the first time in your life." "Frankenstein? Come over here to the window. Yes, I think I may see the light of an intelligence in your eyes. You think you're wising off, but let me tell you something, Mr. Weisenheimer. You just put your money where your mouth is. Do you realize that?" This tired old Schwartzbear interested Billy. What the hell was he talking about? "Horror shows. You got it, smart ass. Horror shows. So ask yourself, who showed you these horror shows? What, you just naturally like to see people tortured? Or maybe somebody taught you how to like to see people tortured, including maybe yourself. Got it? No? Well, think about it. You got lots of time, smart ass." The stinking panther lodged in Billy's brain long before Frankie began her autoerotic visits. What a crock of shit Frankie was, he knew, but suppressed until one day in the 5th year of his confinement, as he walked back to his cell block, he heard a mocking in his brain. "Are you all right, Mom? I'm going to take care of you when I get out. Don't worry." That's what he said, but what he heard in the choir stalls of the damned was, "Please love me, Mom." "Please." "Please what?" the guard said. "Please shit." So the next time Frankie came and said she couldn't stay long because Larry What's-His-Face was waiting outside, Billy looked, and he looked, and the words came to him. Panther shit. And he laughed and looked some more until it seemed to him it was the first time he had ever looked, and he saw that it wasn't his cage he was looking through, it was hers, Frankie's. He saw the panther, the stinking panther pacing behind the bars in her eye. He heard her talk. She didn't ever hear him talk, ever. It was her soap opera, and while she looked over her shoulder onto the tarmac distance where Tom, Dick, or Larry stood, Billy picked the lock of his childhood bestiary, and the door swung open, and he was free, right there in fucking maximum security Dannemora. "Get out of my face. Hey, is that any way to talk to your mother?" the god said. "You want her? You can have her," Billy said. "Cheap." Too bad Billy didn't see the guard quash a conspiratorial grin. If anybody cared, they might have said what made Billy dangerous by the time he checked into Arnie Beasley's flophouse on 9th Avenue was that he could do 400 push-ups a day, or that he had taught himself a lot about electricity. But what made Billy dangerous was that he knew the only thing a panther knows is maul and eat. All your words, all your deeds, your care and willingness to love is nothing but meat and slop. The panther prowls the space between telephone calls, letters, obsessions, broken promises. You're fast food. Walk out. Some mother built that cage long ago of her inability to love. Once her little panther is your obsession, you're its crank. Your sane moments merely threaten it with cold turkey. This is what Billy knew. Thank you, Frankie. Thank you, Tom, Dick, Larry. All in all, Dannemora straightened him out. He owed the poor dead Schwartzbear, Franklin Jones, and the other fascinating basilics, griffins, trolls, centaurs, minotaurs, harpies, satyrs, and rocks in their skulks, swarms, poofs, coveys, nests, pods, gams, knives, and gaggles. He owed them all a big debt. What he didn't owe them were his powers of concentration. Dolphins look, elephants look, panthers gauge, But on the first free morning of his adult life, after 7 years buffeted in the roaring night surf, Billy looked up from his nest of cockroaches to the fuming sun thrashing down 43rd Street and became the morning's namesake, a tiger. As to the difference between tigers and panthers, ask any game warden who has seen a tiger's immense solar face in his windshield. God knows what some paid priest will prate over Billy's grave, but of all his deeds and misdeeds, this signal accomplishment will go unsung. In the land of Mom, Old Glory, and apple pie, we don't hang people for kissing off rotten parents, but we don't hang medals on them either. Mostly, with any luck at all, we womp up enough money for a shrink to tell us we're panther shit. Drink plenty of water, take long walks, move to the other side of the country, or the world. Otherwise you, the one man in the world who can rescue her, will find yourself hand over hand in Rapunzel's tresses, and the next thing you know you're staring a ravening panther in the face. More seductive than all the sirens are the human beasties roving your childhood, pleading with you to let them out. Rapunzels and panthers, sleeping beauties and frog princes, fairy godmothers and kingly brothers, all of you waiting for your fetid ships to come in. Consider how many shrinks and shrunk have committed suicide trying to rescue you. Herbie Goldberg was a trickster, a joker, a squat Clark Gable, altogether decent. A week after he hired Matt Pietro to the night shift at the Three Goldberg Brothers cigar store at 45th and 8th Avenue, he said to him, "So, Matt, what are you, slumming?" "Nah, I'm coming up in the world, Herbie." With a straight face, a sincere look even, he said it. Disarmed, Herbie schlepped around in the deep sink, saying, "Yeah, well, when you get to the top, remember me." Disarming. Matt was disarming even then, 19 years old, a junior at St. John's. No, he didn't need the job. His grandfather thought it a distraction, like athletics, inimical to the purpose of college, which was to get smart. But Matt, who never took a test that didn't amuse him, saw Hell's Kitchen as advanced study. He loved it, not having to live there. Billy had lived there all his life, knew the Goldbergs as an easy mark, knew all the other easy marks, and when 9 months after Matt started to work there and 7 days out of Dannemora he showed up one night to ask for a job, he'd already cased the scene, watched Matt from across the avenue, and was drawn without knowing it to this quiet kid who seemed to listen to everybody's story. Why were they telling this kid their stories? The rum-dum boxer who dashed out into the avenue to pop windshields, tetchy bag ladies, loonies and drunks of every stripe, even the sons of bitches in blue. "So what can I do you?" "I need a job. I grew up around here." "That's a recommendation?" "I'll work hard. I need a break." "Why do I think you've been vacationing upstate?" "I'm an ex-con." "Hey, I need an ex-con like I need another health inspector. You don't look like no soda jerk to me." "What's a soda jerk look like?" "A tall, pale Goomba with a pompadour and duck's ass." That's not what Matt saw when he looked up. He saw the blackest, most fixed gaze he'd ever seen, fixed on him. "He don't look like no wise guy." Amused by his boss's innocent term of art, Matt looked down the marble counter past Herbie at Billy's adze-cut face, eerily handsome. Billy gave him a crooked little smile. "I think you should hire him, Herbie." "You know him?" "I will." "Yeah, well, just do what my father here tells you," Herbie told Billy, liking Matt enough to take the chance. They worked in relative silence for 2 months. 360 of the Daily News, 340 Mirrors, 50 of the Times, 40 Tribunes, hundreds of 8-cent egg creams and big green $5 Cuban Cohiba cigars from the humidor, night after night. Herbie liked his boys. He drew coins from their ears, told them raunchy jokes, and learned he could leave early, trusting them to lock up. "Gentlemen Dagos," he would say, "Good night, keep everything kosher, don't sell the place, have a cigar, good night, sweet princes." Then he would bow and exit to Fort Lee. Matt and Billy would reach for the Cubans and finish up in a haze of blue smoke.
That was Saraceno, or Saraceno, as others pronounce it, written and read by Djelloul Marbrook. This story is an excerpt of the novella Saraceno by Djelloul Marbrook, first published in 2005 by Open Book Press. A second edition was published by Bliss Putt Press in 2012, and a third by Recital Publishing 2021. Where will we see it next?
Welcome back to the Strange Recital, Del.
Yes, it's been almost 4 years since you were last here with us.
Thank you. I have fond memories of that interview. You asked the kind of questions that make an author think about where he's been and where he's going, and I have been thinking about it.
Yeah. Last time, for your interview, we pretended we were recording in a bookstore in Manhattan instead of here in our studio in Woodstock. This time, why don't we just pretend that each of us is at home?
Maybe we're doing this on a Zoom call.
Well, it's actually through telepathy.
I don't think we need mention that.
Well, if we can do that, we'll set a new high watermark for literary interviews.
Yeah. Now, Del, tell us a little bit about the origins of your novella, Saraceno, or Saraceno.
Tom, I can pinpoint it as a matter of dead reckoning. The coordinates are 8th Avenue and 46th Street on the northwest corner, the Goldberg Brothers cigar store and newsstand. I'm studying at Columbia. It's the early 1950s. I'm holding too many jobs and not finding enough time in the day. And yet, this is the best job I'll ever have. It's Hell's Kitchen, a mighty and gritty slum that's now called Clinton. The Westies, a fierce Irish gang, hold sway, but the mafia, better organized and more deadly, is moving in. I'm studying English and its history at Columbia, and I'm awash in Irish, Yiddish, Sicilian, and many other accents, not least the kind of posh New York upper-class accents I hear up on Morningside Heights. It's a kind of heaven for a poet blessed with a good ear. I hear how the humor and gesturalism of Yiddish speakers is infiltrating the speech of Irish and Sicilian Americans. I hear how the gravity and the faux diplomatic intonations of the mafiosi are infiltrating Irish American speech. I hear how the Irish lilt is enchanting the Yiddish and Sicilian speakers. Then there's Frank Costello, Prime Minister of Crime, a real New Yorker from down on Elizabeth Street. He gives me a $20 bill every night for a 3-cent daily news.
Wow.
Can you imagine what kind of tip that is early in the 1950s?
Yeah.
And he says, "What do you see, kid?" He's sitting in his limo, and I've run out to the curb to bring him his paper. And he really wants to know what I see, because that's the mafia's intelligence operation at work.
Yeah.
I tell him that
every night this guy walks into that bar across the avenue with a brown paper bag, and I'm pretty sure it's not his lunch. I have to earn that tip, right? So, over the years, remembering that wonderful job and all those marvelous faces, I get the idea, the very ambitious idea really, of reproducing those speech sounds, of celebrating them. I figure that's why the well-known author Dan Baum called Saraceno a long prose poem. I don't disagree with that. It's a poem. I heard those refugees, those Westies, those mafiosi, and I loved hearing them. If I've done them justice, I've succeeded as a poet, never mind the rest of my work.
Well, we just heard the beginning of the book. Without any spoilers, can you give our listeners an idea of the rest of the story?
Yeah, well, one night, this breathtakingly handsome guy, Alain Delon hardly held a candle to him. He comes in and orders an egg cream for 8 cents. I see this raven-haired guy casing our cigar store every night, but I don't figure it for a heist in the making. First of all, everyone sees Frank Costello chatting with me every night, so unless you've had a lobotomy, you don't mess with anybody who talks to the Prime Minister of Crime every night, right? Not even if you're a Westie. I don't know why, but I told this guy, he was a little older than me, to keep his 8 cents. My name is Billy, he says, Billy Puccini. I sing him the I Will Win line from Turandot. You a paisano, he asks. Honorary, I said. My stepfather is Siciliano. Billy wanted, or rather he needed a job, any job, because he just served 7 years hard time in Dannemora, and the parole officer was keeping an eye on him. We became fast friends for all sorts of improbable reasons. So when I sat down to write Saraceno in Woodstock in 1989, my thoughts turned to Billy.
You know, most of us have seen a lot about the mafia on TV and in films, and it's all somewhat the same. How would you say this book departs from that tradition?
Well, my stepfather had been close friends with Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, and Frank Costello.
Wow.
And Vito and Frank had often sat in our kitchen drinking homemade Marsala. So I heard a lot of stories of hard days on Elizabeth Street, the same street that produced the great artists and filmmakers and actors. And many of those stories involved a clash of cultures. The same clash I was seeing acted out on the streets of Hell's Kitchen. The same clash, which, by the way, we're watching unfold today all over America.
Yeah.
But by the time the Sicilians began arriving, the Irish had gained powerful footholds in East Coast cities like Boston, New York, Providence, and Philadelphia, and they treated the Sicilians badly.
As you know, our goal is to look at fiction that questions reality, and sometimes that can be very subtle. This is a case where it might be said that conventional reality, as it exists in the cultural hive mind, is actually created by TV and movies. So to undermine expectations with literature that breaks cliches is a subversive act. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, my stepfather was a successful businessman. When, after heroic efforts, I got him to speak of the mafia, he said 2 memorable things. First, he said, "You have to understand, when we came here, we wanted to leave 4 things behind: corrupt church, corrupt government, poverty, and you know who." The Sicilian Protective Society, I said.
Yeah.
He looked at me sternly at first, and then he laughed. Yeah, that. But when we got here, and the Irish treated us like they did, we needed a little something, you know. That little something turned out to be La Cosa Nostra, which means our thing. And when the FBI solemnly announced that it had discovered the real name of the mafia, the secret name, and it was La Cosa Nostra, Sicilians rolled on the floor in laughter.
That's great.
At dinner, if the mafia came up at all, and it usually didn't, you were wise to gravely refer to La Familia, which meant a tightly knit network with a code, with a real loyalty system. And this was not the mafia that even Italians like Puzo and Scorsese and Coppola were showing us. They were being honest, but they were also entertaining us, entertaining an audience with a distinct taste for violence.
Yeah.
And I was seeing and hearing the same mafia, but its friendships and loyalties and roots in injustice intrigued me. And I thought just maybe I could write a story about them using the sounds I'd heard in Hell's Kitchen. It was to walk a fine line for me personally, because long before I knew my stepfather, an Irish nanny and her family had embraced me and helped me survive when I'd arrived in America as a dying infant. And I hated hearing some of the Sicilians, although not all, talking about the Irish. But I felt late in my life that I could carry it off, and Saraceno is that effort. The film House of Strangers with Richard Conte came closer in films to portraying the mafia I knew than the Godfather series or Goodfellas. Not because The Godfather and Goodfellas were dishonest or even misleading, but because House of Strangers addressed the relationships that intrigued me. Godfather 2 came closest to doing that. We've all heard Donald Trump badly imitate the curious way mafiosi adopted it of saying what they meant by not saying it in a way that could be used in court. We have seen them imitate their body language, but we have not seen that it's a contemptuous mockery of them, as many movies are.
Yeah. Do you spend much time on the mean streets of Hell's Kitchen anymore? Or should I call it the baby stroller neighborhood of Starbucks and luxury condos?
Well, those streets are mean in different ways now. I never lose a chance to go back to that street corner and those streets. The language I speak in my own head was born there. The language I speak in my poems lives there. I spent many years in a boarding school with kids from East Anglia, and I had a pronounced East Anglian accent when I worked for the three Goldberg brothers. It's gone now, long gone, of course, although it does surface in my writing, particularly my usages. But it's that marvelous amalgam of accents that I heard in Hell's Kitchen that animates my poetry and fiction.
Well, Tom's and my alter egos, the book guys at Recital Publishing, are happy to be able to reintroduce Saraceno in what might be considered its third incarnation. It's worthy of people's attention.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that it's surviving, and I urge poetry lovers to read it as narrative poetry. Others may read it as a mafia love story, or a story about nobility of spirit in dark places.
Well, I think it should be a movie or TV show, if they could do it without ruining it.
It's a slippery slope.
Yep.
I think if they let the dialogue tell the story, they could make an exquisite film.
Yeah, true. Well, our time is up. Thanks for joining us again, Del.
Thank you so very much, Brent and Tom. You are shedding light everywhere you go, and I hope you know that.
Thank you, Del. Okay, Tom, let's turn off the telepathy machine now.
What? Good evening. This is The Strange Recital, on the web at thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode was In the Dark by Croander. This is episode 21041.